What's up, family? I normally don't put urgent, you must watch this, but this is something that you guys need to know. As us Elon holders, we are going to become multimillionaires and billionaires and trillionaires. Like what I told you in Ukraine, how civilians couldn't take money out of their bank accounts, how Russia cannot receive any money. They're trying to cut off and sanction them. There's going to be a time where we're going to have a cyber attack and they're going to shut down all the banks, everything. So this is why I'm showing you this. I'm not a financial advisor. You would like to have your digital currency on a ledger. Again, once you have a ledger, you're able to transfer your Dogelon. It's a ERC20 coin. So you have to transfer on the ERC20 network. Now again, family, I want you guys to pay attention to this video that I'm about to present you right now. You all need to take heed and understand what is coming. I want you all to be prepared.
Called Aureol, which is in Midtown. My dinner companion that night was a senior advisor to BlackRock. As you may know, BlackRock is now the largest asset manager on the planet. It directly manages $5 trillion in assets, and it oversees another $11 trillion through its Aladdin platform. That means one firm controls more money than the GDPs of China, Russia, and Japan combined. Anyway, my dinner companion happens to work directly for BlackRock's CEO. As we nursed our white wine and the evening wore on, she let something slip. If I remember her words, she said something like, "They want to tell us we can't sell." What was she talking about? Who was she talking about? I placed a few calls, first to my contacts in Washington, then to a few people on Wall Street. Soon I was on a plane for a series of meetings to London, to Geneva, back to New York, then down to South America. As I began connecting the dots, a pattern emerged. It revealed a network of more than 189 individuals positioned inside the world's major financial institutions. Some of them hold senior positions inside the IMF, World Bank, and every central bank in the G20, including our own Federal Reserve. These elites share one vision, and they're about to make it a reality. That vision is one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. They've worked for years behind the scenes preparing to realize that vision. They've literally rigged the laws of international finance. Everything is basically in place right now, and there's essentially no way to stop this from happening. When the crisis hits, they'll flip the switch, freezing the global financial system. That will give them time to reset the world economy according to their vision. As the coming crisis unfolds, President Trump will be powerless to stop it. In fact, trying to stop them would probably weaken the president's power altogether.
That is amazing, Jim, really. So what did these elites want from your contact at BlackRock?
Basically, they want to classify BlackRock as too big to fail. The technical term is Systemically Important Financial Institution, or SIFI. That designation normally applies to banks, such as Bank of America. If your bank gets the SIFI label, it means the government will bail you out first in a crisis. But it also means you must turn over control of your bank until the crisis subsides. In this case, they're trying to reclassify BlackRock, an asset manager, as too big to fail. If they succeed, they'll be able to freeze BlackRock when the crisis hits. BlackRock clients won't be able to sell. They won't be able to buy either. Their accounts will go dark indefinitely. And the elite operatives will take control of BlackRock's assets remotely via the internet. But our research shows that their ICE 9 plan goes much, much deeper than that.
Now, you refer to their plan as ICE 9. You just said that. What does that mean?
It's a reference to the Kurt Vonnegut novel, Cat's Cradle. In the book, a mad scientist creates a new form of water molecule called ICE 9. When it comes in contact with other water molecules, it freezes them at room temperature. One drop of ICE 9 can freeze the whole ocean. And that's what these elite operatives are about to do to the world economy.
Now, can you share with our viewers exactly who these operatives are and what their ultimate goal might be?
Like I said, John, more than 189 elite agents have slowly wormed their way into leadership positions across the board. They now sit at or near the head of the IMF, the World Bank, and even our own Federal Reserve. They also control much of what happens at the central banks of China, Russia, India, Brazil, Canada, and Europe. As you know, these institutions form a kind of global superstructure. It forms a kind of snare net encircling all nations. Their leaders aren't democratically elected. They're not accountable to you and me. They're beyond the reach of government and citizens, and yet they hold the fate of the global financial system in their hands. To get a sense of how they operate, imagine an array of floating spheres. One sphere is labeled IMF. One is labeled Fed. One is labeled Bilderberg. One is labeled Wall Street. One is labeled central banks. One is labeled intelligence agencies. One is labeled media, and so on. The elites inhabit all of these spheres, and together the network forms a kind of 3D Venn diagram. As I see it, regardless of what sphere they inhabit, the elites all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. All of their actions are geared toward moving that agenda forward.
Now, are you able to share the identities of these elites with our viewers?
We've identified more than 189 individuals who are in many cases hiding in plain sight. Regardless, they all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. A short list would include Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF; Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England; Raghuramji Rajan, Vice Chairman of the Bank for International Settlements; Haruhiko Kuroda, Governor of the Bank of Japan; William C. Dudley, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York; Agustin Carstens, Governor of the Bank of Mexico; Janet Yellen, Chairman of the Board of the Federal Reserve System; Mario Draghi, President of the European Central Bank; Zhu Min, former Deputy Managing Director of the IMF; Zhou Zhouquan, Governor of the People's Bank of China; Robert E. Rubin, Chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. This A-list of central bankers and other elites is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, not one of these elites will tell you outright what's going on, but I've seen and heard enough to connect the dots for myself. Not long ago, for example, I met with one of their senior operatives. He's a leading economist who served as the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the last crisis. He's considered one of the most influential minds in banking today. We met privately during a conclave in Seoul, South Korea. Of course, I'm talking about Ben Bernanke. I came away from my meeting with him stunned and convinced that ICE 9 was real. Not long before that, I set up a one-on-one meeting with another member of the network. His name is Zhu Min, the former deputy governor of China's central bank. Until recently, he served as deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Zhu is a brilliant guy, like Bernanke, and he's pleasant and well-meaning. There's no doubt in my mind that he's also a member of the elite network preparing to impose ICE 9 on millions of Americans. But I wasn't done with my research. I have since met with dozens of senior officials, intelligence analysts, and former Wall Street colleagues. My quest led to a final meeting, a face-to-face summit with the head of Bilderberg. We met at Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, and he was very eager to get my take on the euro as a currency. I was happy to provide it, of course, in exchange for some valuable intelligence. As I say in my new book, he did not have horns. In fact, he gave me a nice gift when we parted ways, a blue Swedish vase. I keep it in my writing studio at my home in Connecticut. But my point is, I came away from all three meetings convinced of one thing. When the next crisis hits, the elites are planning to freeze the financial system, and they'll replace it with a new system, one not based on the U.S. dollar. When that happens, we'll wake up to a very strange and disturbing new reality.
And for our viewers that are watching today, what might their reality look like that morning? How does this manifest?
First, they'll have gone to bed knowing that a massive financial crisis was underway. But when they wake up, they'll find it has worsened and the contagion has spread worldwide. When they go to withdraw money, their ATM will say, closed temporarily. When they go to sell stocks, their account will say, transaction not available. When they go to their local business, that business will only accept cash if it's open. As citizens realize they're being barred from their money, riots will erupt. It's going to get really bad really quickly.
But how would such a freeze actually work? And wouldn't that be highly illegal?
Well, it wouldn't be illegal technically because they've been quietly laying the groundwork for years. They've rigged the financial laws, changed the rules of the game to allow this to happen. The stage is set. They have the levers in place. The lights are positioned. Now someone just needs to flick a switch and they'll impose ICE 9 rapidly. And again, all of this will be legal because they've rigged the system in their favor. Here in the U.S., for example, Congress pushed through something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. This allows the government to freeze accounts, assets, even whole institutions at will. The only condition is that there's some threat to national security with a foreign connection. Of course, with a global market, every financial crisis has a foreign connection. Any systemic crisis fits the bill. And the thing is, when the next crisis hits, it's going to be so bad, President Trump won't have any choice but to go along with the elite's plan.
Wow. That is, you have to admit, that sounds somewhat hard to believe. Now, how could these operatives actually freeze a whole country's financial system?
Well, fortunately, we have some recent real-life examples to study. The elites have been conducting a series of dry runs for years, leading up to ICE 9. Look at Cyprus, for example. A few years ago, the Cypriot economy was in trouble, especially the banks. The IMF stepped in and loaned Cyprus $10 billion, but the loan came with strings. Now pay attention because this is precisely what they're going to do. But imagine it on a global scale. So in exchange for the capital injection, the IMF demanded control over the Cypriot banking system. More specifically, the IMF froze the entire system, literally every bank in the country. And they did that to ensure the IMF's demands were met, including strict capital controls. So how did all this impact regular citizens? Their local ATMs went dark. Even the bank branches closed, permanently in some cases. Citizens could not withdraw cash. They couldn't even transfer funds from one account to the other. What came next? Wealth extraction on a grand scale. The IMF basically stole 6 to 10% of all the cash in the Cypriot bank accounts. How did the elites justify this? They called it a levy, the price regular citizens had to pay for their government's missteps. Keep in mind, these asset confiscations were done at the balance sheet level with the institutions themselves. They never had to confiscate individual accounts. They froze every account by controlling a handful of the country's biggest banks. When the next crisis hits, we're going to see this here in the U.S. and around the world, and it'll be a highly coordinated global attack on the entire system simultaneously.
All right, but hold on here. Wasn't Cyprus a fairly isolated example of the globalist elites taking over a nation's banking system?
Not even close, John. The same thing has happened in other places. It's happening in Greece right now. As you know, Greece has been navigating a massive debt crisis for years. In 2015, the IMF and their partners moved in to recapitalize Greece's banks. That just means they agreed to pump capital back into the stalled system, like priming a pump. In return, the IMF demanded control of the banks and citizens' individual accounts by default. Suddenly, Greek families weren't allowed to withdraw more than $460 per week. Imagine trying to pay your mortgage, gas, and groceries on less than $500, let alone your medical insurance. Of course, it led to widespread panic, rioting, and worse. And that's exactly what we'll see on a global scale when the next crisis hits.
Now, clearly, a national freeze can devastate the citizens big time. So my question is, why would the elites even want to do that?
Well, you're right, of course. This has been devastating to Greek citizens. But the short answer is control. To save itself from insolvency, Greece gave up its economic autonomy. The country is, for all intents and purposes, under the control of the European Central Bank and the IMF. Yet this top-down approach still hasn't solved the problem. As one Greek official told Reuters, the banks are in a deep freeze, but the economy is getting weaker. This is a microcosm of what we're about to see in America and around the world.
But still, I mean, really, aren't Greece and Cyprus fairly isolated examples?
Unfortunately, if you think governments tend to keep their hands off citizens' assets, you're mistaken. Elites have a long history of seizing control of people, institutions, and especially money. In February of 1917, for example, the Russian elite, who believed in a one-world workers' party, closed the stock market. Folks lost every penny. Their portfolios literally vanished overnight. The Russian exchanges remained closed for nearly 70 years. They reopened in January of 1992. In December of 1941, China closed its stock market without warning. It stayed closed for 4 years. The German government closed the stock market from July 1931 to April 1932 during a credit crisis. The list of examples goes on, and it goes back decades.
But again, I have to ask you, could such a systematic freeze really happen here in the United States?
It already has happened, John, multiple times, just on a smaller scale. In 1914, the Treasury Department shuttered the New York Stock Exchange for 4 months. Citizens couldn't buy or sell. They couldn't cash out. They couldn't do anything. England's elites did the same thing to the London Stock Exchange. But we've seen more recent examples too. If you want to see what a modern-day Einstein freeze looks like, take a look at this image. Those blue dots represent trades on the New York Stock Exchange on July 8, 2015. You can see where they abruptly stop. That was the moment the elites running the exchange pulled the plug. You weren't allowed to buy or sell a single share, period. But I want people to take a closer look at this chart. Now imagine it represents all the banking and brokerage activity on Earth. You see that point around 11:33 a.m. when you had the first big drop-off in activity? That represents the beginning of the coming Ice 9 cash freezes. Now you see when all the activity stops and the screen goes totally white? All activity ceases. The system goes dark. The pattern is the same with these freezes every time. You have some initial trigger or shock, then you have an immediate freeze, and the elites emerge with more control. You see it over and over. Shock, freeze, power grab. Shock, freeze, power grab. With Ice 9, we'll see a global shock and a global freeze, and then we'll see the elites making a global power grab. Here's another example, again with the New York Stock Exchange. On October 27, 1997, the Dow had lost 350 points quickly. Again, the elites responded by shuttering the entire New York Stock Exchange instantaneously. Imagine if you had been trying to sell. Your money would have been locked into the system and your net worth would have been plummeting by the second. Meanwhile, you're just watching it happen, totally powerless to do anything about it. What we're seeing right now is an increase in the tempo of these mini shocks and mini freezes. They're coming faster and faster. You had 9/11, followed by a freeze. We had the flash crash of 2010, followed by a freeze. And in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy.
But you're talking about American stock markets. I mean, if the elites do freeze our exchanges and brokerage accounts, won't our cash be safe in the banks?
No. In fact, the biggest bank freeze to date happened right here in the USA. Of course, I'm talking about Roosevelt signing Proclamation 2039 in 1933. With one stroke of his pen, FDR shuttered every bank in America. A few weeks later, he followed up by freezing the entire gold market. Executive Order 6102 literally outlawed citizens from owning gold. That freeze lasted 41 years until Gerald Ford ended that freeze in 1974. When the coming crisis hits, we'll see this repeated on a larger scale through the IMF, World Bank, and the Fed. Again, there will be nothing the White House can do. They have no direct control over the institutions that will carry this out. Not even the U.S. president can control the Fed. Same with the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, or the People's Bank of China. When the crisis hits, it will likely be bad enough that Trump would get on board anyway. But it won't be enough to save his presidency. Even if he survives his first term, he won't get a second one.
But we really haven't addressed one important factor here. Now, you say the elites will need an excuse to impose ICE 9 on America, and that excuse will come in the form of a massive financial crisis, much worse than 2008. And you say that this crisis could come within the next 6 weeks. Regardless of the actual day it hits, you say the coming crisis is unavoidable. So please explain to our viewers what you mean by that exactly.
In the aftermath of the 2008 crisis, the Pentagon recruited me for another special project. Our goal was to create a new system for modeling and predicting systemic financial collapse. I received an invitation to a classified meeting at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. This meeting occurred on April 8, 2009. In attendance were several of our country's leading physicists and national security experts. We met at Los Alamos for an important reason. The lab there houses the most powerful modeling systems on the planet. They're running predictive modeling simulations on everything from weather events to nuclear chain reactions. Los Alamos National Laboratory takes a system-based approach to predictive modeling. Their computers don't look at events in isolation. They look at the whole system, how the events interact with each other. It's a relatively new branch of physics called complexity theory. You can look at the approach in a number of different ways. It's like seeing the forest for the trees. It's like understanding all the dominoes in a chain reaction. Let me give you an example of this approach. Let's say you have 10 dominoes lined up on a table, and you have 2 observers. One observer, Joe, sees all 10 dominoes from the beginning of the experiment. The second observer, Sally, can only see 1 domino, the 7th in the series. Looking at domino number 7, Sally can still make plenty of observations. It appears stable, for example. It also appears just as likely to fall in one direction as the other. She can study it for years, and she can assume it will never fall. On the other hand, Joe sees all 10 dominoes, including number 7. So one day a force comes along and tips domino number 1 into domino number 2. At that moment, Joe can tell you with near 100% certainty that domino 7 is about to fall. Sally, on the other hand, continues along blissfully unaware, yet with total expertise when it comes to domino number 7. She just can't see how it fits into the system of dominoes, and she can't see the inevitable event coming. When domino 7 falls, Sally is caught almost completely unaware. Well, in essence, Sally represents the mainstream economists and media pundits. Joe represents the approach we developed at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I've since refined that approach into an advanced threat detection system called Los Alamos Multi-Factor Projection, or LAMP, LAMP. LAMP uses advanced computer assisted modeling and systems-based analysis to shine a light on systemic risk. And it can show us for the first time all the dominoes at play in the world financial system. You can look at our economy like a very long series of dominoes. Some run north-south, some run east-west, but they all interconnect at some point. Together, they form a complex system. Our Los Alamos multi-factor model was designed to analyze that system. So what are we seeing from our analysis? In complexity terms, our system has entered into a critical state. The dominoes have begun to fall, and the next crisis is now inevitable. And when that crisis hits, the elites will impose ICE 9, freezing the world financial system.